We are back with some more filthy Xenos, and actually, to be fair, we are starting off with an army that I do really like and that I play. We are starting off with the Tyranids, and I also thought in this video, because the Nids didn't actually get much in this data slate, we may as well go through their cousins, the Genestealer Cults, while we were here. So yes, as I mentioned, the Tyranids got no adjustments to their actual rules. I know some people were concerned that there might be some nerfs to the Subterranean Assault Detachment, which is proving to be one of the better ways to play the Tyranids at the moment, but it seems GW is happy with where that detachment is at for now. What did change though is a few relatively small, quite insubstantial, but some points changes that have made it a little bit easier to fit a few more things into the army. So nothing super huge, but at least on the plus side, we didn't get any nerfs. The two most impactful changes in terms of what I play and in my opinion were a 10-point drop to the Genestealers. If you bring a unit of 10 along, they are still 75 points for 5 of them, but if you now take a full unit of 10, it is going to cost you 140 points instead of 150. This is quite good for me because I have 3 units of 10 and I've never bought them in a game before, but I've always wanted to bust out 3 units of 10, each being led by a Broodlord. That is now going to cost you 660 points instead of 690. So yes, it is still quite expensive. It's maybe not the best, most competitive option, but I think it sounds like it could be a lot of fun. And it will also now allow you to grab something like Alien Cunning, the enhancement on a Broodlord, for the same cost, which I think could be quite an interesting way to play them, to get all 3 units into reserves or redeployed to help them survive and get up the board and into combat with as many alive as possible. I don't know, it might not be good at all, but I'm going to have a play around with it, and I probably am going to try out 3 units of 10 Genestealers with a Broodlord in each and that enhancement, just to see how it performs and if it's fun. So I'm quite excited that this points drop is nothing huge, but it does just make that combo a bit more viable now, so I'm quite looking forward to giving it a go. The Neurolictor also dropped 10 points. He's gone down to just 70 instead of 80, and he is now a real competitor to just the regular Lictor now. He is just 10 points more, and that gets you that extra Synapse unit, which can be really important. And yes, he is less killy than a regular Lictor. He definitely has some downgrades compared to him, but equally, you get another nice useful disruption piece, you get a nice utility piece, you can get some extra command points when it kills a character, so it's definitely worth trying out now, I think. And if you were running, say, 2 or 3 Neurolictors before, as well as some Genestealers, your army could be about 40 to 50 points cheaper now, which certainly isn't nothing. In terms of units that were being brought in our new detachment, the Subterranean Assault itself, the Morlock, although it's not as good generally as the Trigon, could now be a viable option, I think. It's dropped down 10 points down to 135. As I said, I still think the Trigon is better overall. It's 140, and I would probably still rather take that. But 135 points for 16 Strength 8 attacks, as well as those mortals when it comes up from the ground from reserve, that is a lot more viable than it was at 145, so it could well be worth a look. And if you wanted to run a load of snaky boys with Trigons and Morlocks and Raveners and that sort of thing, this is definitely a bit easier to fit into your army now. And then finally, for the points changes, the Tervagon, the big mama herself, she actually dropped a hefty 15 points. She's gone down to 160 instead of 175, and that gives her a lot more use as another Synapse character. Especially if you run an army that has a lot of gaunts and you enjoy playing with gaunts, her ability to return Termagants to a unit, as well as giving out some lethal hits, is a lot nicer at 160 than it was at 175. I would say she's maybe not quite there yet. One thing I was really hoping to see for her, and I think would be a great way to make her super competitive and worth taking, especially at 160 points, would be if she could buff up any gaunts. So not just Termagants, but also your Hormagaunts, maybe even your Gargoyles. If her buffs spread to those as well, she would be a really strong pick in my opinion, and definitely worth taking, certainly in lists like the Unending Swarm detachment. So nothing huge here really, just some nice quality of life points changes really. The weird thing about this Munitorium field manual is that GW seems to have forgotten that the new Raveners exist. There is no hyper-adapted Ravener entry, and the ones listed here, the regular Raveners, are the old version. They are the 3 for 75 points or 6 for 150. Now, I'm not going to say there's any, issue here or that the new ones are going away and the old ones are coming back. I think this is just purely a GW quality control issue. They will probably do an update very, very soon, if not by the time this video has gone up to show the new units in there. But I just thought it was a bit funny because GW completely forgetting about a brand new unit for the Tyranids is entirely on brand for them at the moment. I'm not saying I'm disappointed with the changes here because the Tyranids did overall just get a buff. There is nothing nerf-wise here, but I would have liked to have seen a bit more. I think the Tyranids are struggling at the moment. I would have loved to have seen maybe some points drops for things like Carnifexes or Zone Thropes, or what I would have actually preferred to have seen was maybe some rules adjustments. Things like Warriors and again those Carnifexes, they are struggling at the moment and they could do with some slightly better data sheets. In a way, the Tyranids are almost a mirror of the Dark Angels. The Dark Angels have got really, really good data sheets, but their detachments pretty much suck across the board. The Tyranids, we have really quite solid detachments. There are a few in the Codex that are very, very usable, but our data sheets are quite poor. So I would have liked to have seen not just points drops, but actually improvements to our data sheets to make the things usable and worthwhile. Getting 3+ to hit on Warriors would have been good. I would love to see the Carnifexes split into 2 profiles so that you had the melee version and the ranged version so that they could actually give them a relevant rules for each type. Just a few things I think they could have done that would have not made them super, super competitive, but just would have given Tyranids a bit more option in terms of the data sheets available to them so that you could bring some things that were a bit more powerful and useful. So yeah, I'm not going to complain too much because we did overall get a buff from this datasheet. It's just not a particularly good one, and unless you are running a load of Genestealers or Neurolictors or that sort of thing, you're really not going to feel it. But if you are running those like I do, then yeah, maybe your list will be 30, 40, maybe 50 points cheaper if you're lucky, so could get you an extra unit. Maybe just throwing in a unit of Barb Gaunts or something like that if you have the points could be a nice way to just give an extra unit in there just to add some more firepower or objective control or something like that. Maybe you might be able to fit in a Biovore or something with the changes that have come in this. So nothing huge, but it could make a tiny difference to your army if you're lucky. On the Genestealer Cults front, there was actually a lot more in terms of changes. These guys also seem to have caught almost as many rewrites and rules adjustments as the Orcs did. Now, I will say straight away, I am not the most up-to-date with the Cults. I don't know their rules especially well, but I do know they've been reasonably strong lately. They've been performing pretty well, but they've also had quite a number of rewrites and updates. It does seem sometimes that GW isn't entirely sure what to do with them at times, but I would be really, really interested to know below in the comments for anyone that does play them or know them, what these changes have done for your lists, how they've impacted your playstyle or your games, and if you think they are overall a net positive or a nerf. So on the points front, there are a couple of nerfs and a few drops in points to help balance that out. The increases come to the Achilles Ridge Runners. A single unit goes up 10 points to 95 instead of 85, which just makes it, I guess, a little bit harder to fit in those lone single units. They are still 170 points for 2, so they're still the same 85 points for bringing 2 of them, but if you are just going for that pure MSU build, I guess that does have a slight impact. Likewise, for the Italan Jackals, they get a similar nerf, going up 10 points for the minimum squad, so it's 85 points for 5 of them, but then a discounted 150 points for a full unit of 10. I mean, they're still cheap enough, I think, to bring a few in your games and in your armies if you are going for that MSU build with a load of units all over the table, but this does perhaps, I don't know, maybe lock you out of a character or an enhancement if you were spamming them as much as possible. But to balance that out, as I said, there are a good number of points drops. The Abominant and the Primus both drop 10 points each, going down to 85 and 70 respectively. I can see from some tournament lists that I've looked at that the Primus does appear in a few, so seeing a drop there will be nice to free up a few points, although, as we'll see in just a bit, he has caught a bit of a nerf rules-wise. The Abominant has become an 85 point toughness 6 5 wound melee monster, which seems okay. I mean, I don't see him in that many lists, but maybe he will make an appearance now. I don't know how well he fits in with the overall Genestealer Cult playstyle, but there could be some play there with that drop, especially because there's also been a small change to the Aberrants as well, as we will see in just a second. The hybrid metamorphs, they also dropped 10 points for 5. They've gone down to 70, or they've dropped a full 20 points as well for 10. So that is just 140 points if you bring the full unit. That does just make them a bit easier to fit in with a full squad with hand flamers, for instance, and still keep enough room in your points for some of the more useful enhancements you may want to bring. Things like a chink in the armor or the assassination edict I see being taken a lot, and they are 20 and 15 points respectively, I believe. Finally, the actual pure strain Genestealers themselves, they also drop much like the Tyranids. A unit of 5 stays the same, but a full unit of 10 has dropped down to 140 points, so 14 points per model, which for their melee output, as I said with the Genestealers, is actually fairly scary. I think they are not bad at that points cost if you can get them to survive and get them into combat. On the actual rules front, as I said, like the Orcs, there is a lot of red. The Aberrants, as I mentioned, get a very small but potentially quite significant change. They now only need 4 Resurgent points to bring them back with your Cult Ambush rule. They previously cost 5, so in a Strike Force game where you get 10 Resurgent points, it is now that much easier to bring them back while still having enough points left over for something like a full unit of Genestealers or a full unit of Neophyte Hybrids. It just makes it a bit cleaner, them being 4 points to return rather than 5. So that's a really nice, if nothing else, quality of life change, I think. And as I said, it could make Aberrants a bit more attractive to bring in. I don't know how good they are really, but they could be a bit more worthwhile now, knowing that you can bring them back a little bit easier. Elsewhere, the actual detachments in the Codex also got some fairly hefty changes. In your Biosanctic Brood Surge, the Evasive Vanguard stratagem has changed completely. This now targets one of your Cult Ambush markers instead of a unit of Genestealers in reserve, and it now allows you to pick that marker and set it up on the battlefield more than 9 inches away from enemy units after an enemy has ended a move within 9 inches of it. So it gives you this incredibly strong reactive move for one of your markers, essentially, that you can then use to bring in something from reserve. It doesn't require that unit to be a pure strain Genestealer unit anymore. So that's really nice. It gives you a bit more flexibility and just a bit more, trickery to force your opponent to plan around it, knowing that you can do that reactive move with your marker. The Host of Ascension detachment also got some changes. Primed and Readied still does the same thing, essentially giving you critical hits on a 5 instead of a 6, but it does now cost you 2 command points instead of just 1. So that's a fairly hefty nerf to that ability, making it much, much harder for you to leverage any sustained or lethal hits that you may have on a unit. But then elsewhere, your Return to the Shadow strat has also had a change. It no longer goes off in the enemy shooting phase after an enemy unit has shot. Instead, this is done at the end of the opponent's fight phase, and it lets you pick an infantry unit not in engagement range of an enemy to go back into reserves. So this turns it into a more standard uppy-downy style stratagem. It does mean you don't need a unit to be shot at to use this, which is good, so it can be a bit more flexible on which unit you use it on. So I would say overall, it's probably a bit of a buff, although I would say to counter that, being able to use this in the enemy shooting phase to potentially avoid a follow-up charge from the enemy, you can no longer do that, and that sounds like it could have been quite a nice trick to pull. So there is maybe a bit of a loss there, but I think overall it's a bit more flexible and a bit more usable. Also getting some detachment changes is the Outlander Claw. This one has seen a change to the Along Shadowed Trail strat. Again, this has had quite a significant change, much like Evasive Vanguard. It now targets a Cult Ambush marker instead of a unit of Atallan Jackals, but it keeps that same reactive move aspect, so it lets you pick up and move the marker after an enemy ends within 9 inches of it after they've moved. So again, really, really useful and just some nice tricksy movement shenanigans to play around with your opponent. The final set of changes come from the Xeno Creed Congregation. Their Downtrodden Rise strat now still goes off at the end of the enemy reinforcement step, but it doesn't require you to have no Cult Ambush markers on the battlefield anymore, and it also allows you to set up any unit, not just a hybrid or a metamorph unit, and you can set them up anywhere on the battlefield 6 inches away from enemies. So this essentially gives you an extra rapid ingress to use. And yes, it is still 2 command points, but that is really, really powerful, especially for an army like Genestealer Cults. Being able to use this to get a unit set up to make a follow-up charge or unleash some shooting in your next turn is really, really powerful, or just, using it to drop in a unit behind some cover at the end of the enemy movement phase, so they now have to think about it in their turn and it might mess up their battle plans a bit. It's really, really powerful. It's really useful. It can be really good for playing mind games with your opponent, and it is just that much more flexible now. So that is another quite significant win, I think. And then we get to the last change in this data slate. As I said, the Primus has caught a small nerf. He has got 10 points cheaper, but his Cult Demagogue rule no longer gives re-roll hit rolls to his unit. Instead, it gives +1 to hit. Now, generally, especially for Genestealer Cults, that is a slight nerf, and it does kind of make his 10-point drop make a bit more sense. +1 to hit certainly isn't a bad buff, don't get me wrong, but your army mostly hits on 4s, so re-rolling 4s to hit takes you from a 50% chance to hit to 75% chance, whereas going to a 3-up to hit, so giving you +1 to hit, only takes you from 50% up to around 67%. So it does have a noticeable impact there, and on anything that you are, hitting on 4s for, you will be hitting a good bit less now. So that is definitely a nerf to his rules there. Overall, I would say there's some fairly significant changes for the Genestealer Cults and some very minor changes for the Nids. I do think both have come out overall better. The Nids, as I said, haven't got much, but they are just cheaper overall. That's the long and short of it. Nothing else changed. They did just get a bit cheaper. So if you are running Neurolictors or Genestealers or that kind of thing, you are going to be happy. Genestealer Cults did, yes, catch some nerfs, but I think, like the Orcs, this will open up some build variety for the Genestealer Cults. Xenocreed Congregation, Biosanctic Broodsurge, and the Outlander Claw all got some relatively nice strat updates, and there are also a few reasonably decent points drops to go along with it, so it maybe isn't a total win across the board, but certainly for some builds you will likely have a bit more to play around with and have some new tricks and stratagems to kind of unleash on the enemy. So that's going to be it for this video. As always, I'd love to know what your thoughts are, what you think about the updated Tyranids and also the Genestealer Cults, and what new builds or playstyles you are going to be having a play around with in your games. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.